Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your stamina and your interest in joining us for our last session this afternoon and your final dose of substance on rule of law issues. My name is Andrew Solomon. I'm a senior rule of law advisor at USAID here in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the panel, I'd like to thank JustTrack and the University of South Carolina for inviting us to present today, and also for selecting this topic for the third annual Rule of Law Innovation Symposium, Rule of Law 3.0, if you will. Each of the previous symposia have contributed significantly to the development of the field of practice by exploring innovative approaches, practices, tools to address both long-standing as well as emerging issues and challenges to rule of law promotion around the world, inclusive of both justice and security sector assistance. And today's symposium has thus far continued this tradition with developing a better awareness and understanding of the role and the use of technology in strengthening law enforcement and also facilitating greater public participation and engagement in governance processes. Now, our final panel this afternoon endeavors to continue that tradition, and we will do so by focusing on how to improve service delivery through e-governance and e-justice systems and tools. Now, this topic is highly relevant to governance and rule of law initiatives that we see around the world, including many that are being supported by USAID, by the State Department, and other actors, including maybe by some of you here in this field and on this panel. Many of these initiatives, both e-governance and e-justice, integrate these systems and services as a means to strengthen the ability of public sector institutions to deliver key services more efficiently and more effectively. In addition, they can serve to make these same services more accessible and more responsive to all citizens of society. And then these systems are also used to strengthen the transparency and the accountability in public administration, which in turn can contribute to curbing corruption and at the same time strengthen public trust in institutions of governance, including justice and security. And I think we may all be familiar with authoritative sources that demonstrate in many of the countries in which we work. It's the justice sector and the security sector institutions, the courts, the judges, the police, and in some instances, the legal profession that rank at the bottom of public trust and confidence. So e-governance, e-justice offers the potential to address or begin addressing some of these issues. But it has some challenges and some pitfalls. So fortunately today we have with us three experts, seasoned experts, to help us really better understand innovative approaches to these types of systems and tools and how to apply them in different types of programming. You have everyone's bios, but I would still like to briefly introduce the panel, beginning with Dr. Julia Glidden, General Manager at the Global Government Industry Practice at IBM Global Business Services. We then have Nino Vardo-Sanidze, Senior Legislative and Oversight Manager in the Good Governance Initiative in Georgia. This is a USAID program implemented by Tetra Tech ARD. And then we have Jeff Apperson, Vice President of the National Center for State Courts, which I consider to be a leading think and do tank in our field. Our panelists will begin with about 12 to 15 minutes of opening remarks. We will then shift into a facilitated discussion here between the panelists, and we'll leave some time for to open up the questions from the audience for your engagement. So with that, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And on behalf of the IBM Corporation, it's my great pleasure to be here today talking to you about such a timely and important topic. I think, I was struck by the last discussion we had. Technology is not the answer. That might surprise you coming from me and the IBM Corporation, but I could not agree with the previous comments more. Technology is a facilitator. It's an enabler. And in the current disruptive pace of change, we're going to reach a tipping point where it will be negligent on us all not to embrace it. So with that framework, what I really wanted to do is hope technology works. Does anybody know how to, Andrew?
These are one of the pitfalls of technology sometimes.
There, okay. What I wanted us to do, this late stage in the day, and we've heard about so many tremendous initiatives, and we've heard about challenges and obstacles to harnessing technology to improve social justice, to increase safety, to increase citizen trust in the validity and the sanctity of government services. But I kind of wanted us to wipe our minds a little clear from everything we've talked about. Just imagine a world. Let's all go back to being 5. We have no boundaries. We don't know what can't happen. We don't know about the money roads in DRC. We just imagine a world where accessing public safety services, legal services, justice services, really any service, is as easy as talking to a friend. But the service is designed for me, not 2 million people in a state or an entity or region or a government, and I access it as if I'm talking to Andrew right now. Because we know, just by the very basis of the topic today, right? We know, it's almost a cliche, that the world has changed and that technology has fundamentally changed us all. But what I've found in 20 years of working in tech innovation in government, and I ran my own tech boutique where I did a tremendous amount of work with the United Nations and the EU on driving the type of tech innovation pilots we heard so much about today. We know that in forums like this, we take a step out into the way we lead our real lives, which is all digitized, all interactive, all voice recognized, all mobile, all data. But then we come back to our day jobs, and it's like, well, not here. You don't really understand USAID. The UN has a reducing administrative burden, but yes, Dr. Glidden, to participate in this panel, you really do have to sign it 7 times in the right ink. And the EU really will delay a project for 6 months because the 27 partners haven't done the right timestamp. And I remember when I ran my own company, I had to actually get the bank to invent a watermark because nobody had it anymore. They weren't used. And this was for a project about reducing the administrative burden and driving effective and efficient innovation in government. I mean, it's hilarious. So technology's changed us all. It's changed all of our expectations. I remember standing in that bank with the teller looking at me like I was crazy, and I was like, well, if it says Barclays on it, and we just put the date in, maybe you could sign it and it'll be good enough, right? Technology has changed all of our expectations about what's possible, except when we go back to our day jobs. And I can tell you, working in a company with almost 400,000 people across 173 countries in the world, we are as riddled by the hindrances I'm talking about as anyone, right? Because by the very nature of bureaucracy, and I'd like to remind us all, it used to be a good word. When Weber coined the phrase, it was an advance because it enabled scale on village living when everything was communal. Before the iron cage, it was an advance. We're all now stuck within an iron cage of bureaucracy, despite the fact that technology has shown us new pathways forward and has really fundamentally changed our expectations of what's possible. And I would say to you, governments, international organizations, not-for-profits, NGOs, they're no exception, right? We are all, as I'm talking, I've worked on countless innovation projects with the UN, countless innovation projects with the EU, countless GovTech projects with real pioneering agencies and government actors and stakeholders around the world. But when I step back and even, hearing the great work that is happening in the field today, when I really think about it, what we've effectively done so far is basically we've digitized the status quo. So we used to have to shuffle amongst a proliferation of folders and manila files and access pieces of paper and data. But really, what we're doing now is we're juggling multiple mobile apps, if we're lucky, and pieces of paper and files. We haven't really fundamentally gone beyond the paradigmatic thinking of the 20th century bureaucracies. We might create a mobile app, but we still don't yet have a holistic vision. And I would tell you from my EU work, particularly in the smart city domain, really we've been stuck in a land of pilots. Because when you hear what Medicap is doing, you think, but of course, but why is that not the norm? Why wouldn't what Uluru, I'm going to say that wrong, somebody, Ululu, chatbots, these technologies are increasingly ubiquitous. They're increasingly cost effective. The ability to deliver them are increasingly there. But really, we're still in the land of pilots. So if I challenge the technology and go back, the confusion of the different, these apps are like little pilots everywhere. We really have no holistic vision. We really are still very much stuck in our 20th century inherited ways of thinking about. When what citizens really expect, and especially the preponderance of the world that are with your exception, that are younger than most of us, they're really expecting us to reinvent the way things have been done, to cleanse our minds, to be 5 years old and imagine a world. Because what we know for sure is we would not imagine a world where you had to stamp papers 52 times, where you had to transmit the same documents to the same people the same time, where we weren't able in a remote village to use the technology that is ubiquitous and is available to improve lives, to keep people safe, to provide social justice. We wouldn't invent that world. And we wouldn't invent a world of why we can't. Because I promise you, everyone in this room, as I'm talking, is thinking, that would be great, but, you don't understand. It can't happen here. And I want to give you one aha moment I'd had about the limitations of our own mindset in terms of what's possible. And it was, I met in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, I met a venture capitalist woman who knew the Airbnb founders. I was like, wow, you're going to be rich someday. And she told me they were on their last $50 pitching for VC monies, which they didn't get. But they brought their beds to stay in a friend's room. They brought their air mattresses, and they said, hey, why can't we do this to make it easier and cheaper and more effective for people to just stay when they don't have money or to stay where they want to stay? And they invented Airbnb. This is 6, 7, 8 years ago? And I remember thinking, oh, they don't understand insurance, health and safety, the hotels, regulations. But you know what? These were 22, 20-year-old kids. They didn't know why they couldn't. They just had a yes, we can attitude. And what I would like to argue is that it's not just time to harness technology to reinvent the future. There's a moral obligation on all of us that are privileged to work in the jobs that we work in, that are motivated by social good. I joined IBM 2 years ago, and it's still very hard for me not to talk about myself as a public servant, because that was my entire career, and I know it's a vocation. We do what we do because we care and we genuinely want to improve the rule of law, to make people's lives safer, to improve social justice. And what I think is that the technologies that we've heard about today, chatbots, Watson, artificial intelligence, blockchain, We're at an inflection point in time where if we have the will and the imagination, it's not about money anymore, to change the paradigmatic people and process views that we've inherited, that we operate in every day, that we really can take these tools and technologies and bring them together to place people at the center of everything we do, to make accessing the tools of social justice and of public safety as easy as talking to a friend. Now, I see here, we talked about rule of law 3.0. I would say cognitive government 4.0. It's a term I've been talking about with the United Nations for a while, because I think, we now talk about digital government, and that was an advance on e-government. But where we really need to be going, because this is where the technology is increasingly cost-effectively and easily taking us, is cognitive government. And what do I mean by cognitive government? I mean a government that's able to take these vast streams of data. Again, we heard about just the power of data in the DRC to bring social justice to victims, female victims of horrific crimes. But this power to harness data is capable across every element of our lives and every element of the rule of law topic for us here today. One small pilot I'd like to just share with you, maybe 2 or 3, but very, very small vignettes, is what AI, what we call cognitive, does is it allows you to access unprecedented streams of data on a volume and a level at a rate and a pace never heard of before. But not just to access that data and stick it into algorithms that we then just extract out what we already know, but AI cognitive can process that data and actually understand, really more importantly, reason, and then what is fundamentally disruptive in terms of reinventing, not just transforming, reinventing paradigms to learn. So one small application of this was in the Florida Department of Corrections. We all know that the quickest way to create a lifelong criminal is to incarcerate them. You basically send them to, get their Oxford PhD in a life of crime. And we all know that the real crime is when we consign a juvenile to that fate. So what the Florida Department of Corrections did a pilot where they applied AI or cognitive to access all the criminal record files and to help the judges in sentencing and making sentencing recommendations. And the statistics were really, it's a small pilot, I don't want to overstate the case, but the statistics were really very, very powerful. 28% reduction in the number of children sent to secure facilities. That's 28% of those children were not sent to become lifelong professionals in a lifelong career of crime. 22% reduction in children that were put on parole, and a 15% reduction, which is really fascinating, in children that were arrested in the first place, put into the system in the first place. If you just think out of this one small pilot alone, what you can do in terms of shifting the paradigm from what our 20th century world is today. We are reactive and we are siloed. Our criminal justice does not talk to our police, does not talk to the social workers, does not talk to the schools, does not talk to the hospitals. So much of the elements in a child's life that puts them on a pathway to crime are known usually by the age of 7. The school knows the child is out a lot, or comes in hungry, or has suspicious bruises. The hospital knows when that child has been in and out of the hospital. The police know when the parent that has been incarcerated for child abuse has been let home. But what we don't do is join up these data sources to create a holistic view of a citizen, of a person at risk, of a youth at risk, of a child at risk, to create a picture that will allow the institutions of government to intervene before the rule of law is ever even at the point of contact with that child. And what I would argue is that, again, everyone I can hear, and we had Facebook on stage talking about the challenges, and they're very real challenges, data protection and privacy, Big Brother, those are very real. I'm not underestimating those. But if we allow that immediate, oh no, not here, we can't do it, to stop us from responsibly looking at ways to harness the ability of cognitive and data to genuinely reinvent the way we do things so that we are predictive and proactive, not reactive and siloed, we are losing an opportunity to transform society for the better. And what I would like to leave us with is that the ability to do this is closer than we think and becoming closer than we think every day. Because it's almost a cliche for me to now say the pace of change has never been faster. We are living in an era of exponential change. It used to be very easy when I ran my own company and to give a keynote like this to sound like I had a crystal ball or I was a genius. Because all I did is look at what happened in the private sector or how I led my life. And I would tell government, you know, you've got to get ready for this. It's coming in 5 years. It's now 2 years, and I would argue it will soon be 18 months. So if we take a look at the data protection and the privacy constraints, never mind the interoperability constraints and the legacy system constraints that held us back, I would like to leave us with thinking about, I know we talked about blockchain today, and a lot of associations still with cryptocurrency, but blockchain, I would argue, our chairman, Ginny Rometty, argues, is as transformational as the internet was 20 years ago. And it will fundamentally transform the way we can share data securely in a way that places the citizen, the individual, as the owner, as the custodian, as the empowered owner of their own, or steward of their own data. Because there is the cryptocurrency of blockchain, open, permissionless, arguably a Wild West. But there's also, I won't get too technical, but secure permissioned access to blockchain, where I control my data, or on behalf of my child, I provide access to those bits of a medical record, of a police record, of an education record, to the stewards that I trust and I believe in, to create a picture that can be proactive. These tools and these technologies exist. We've heard about co-creation. When you combine the power of what's coming online faster and at a more rapid pace, AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, to give us even more data than we have, with co-creation, right? Harnessing the single greatest asset any government institution has, which is the servant, the individuals, the citizens that it serves. The ability for us to truly transform the social justice system, to shift from reactive and siloed to proactive and predictive, has never been greater. And I would argue that the onus is on all of us in this room, with the privileged positions we have and the jobs we have, to imagine a future where no child, where no person is left behind because of the limitations of our 20th century ways of thinking and reacting, but rather we have painted a new vision of social justice based on the 21st century possibilities that are in our hands today and rapidly coming on stream. Thank you.
Thank you for those forward-looking remarks. And I want to come back to the yes we can attitude, the land of pilots, and then also this challenge of sharing of information. But before we do that, I think, Nino, you'll bring us down to a more programmatic level based on your work in Georgia.
Oh, and here goes my
Of course.
Sorry. Yeah, I think I'm good. So thank you, Andrew, for the introduction, and I'm really humbled to be here with this distinguished panel. And I don't think I've ever been described as a seasoned expert, so thank you for that too. As Andrew said, I'm going to take you to a local level now and talk about some of the things that we at Good Governance Initiative in Tbilisi, Georgia, have done to advance e-governance in the country. Just before we do that, quick facts about where Georgia stands in terms of internet penetration and access, but also some of the e-governance efforts that the government of Georgia has undertaken. So with the population of 3.7 million, internet penetration rate is just about half of the population. And this trend has been strongly growing for the last decade. But there still is a quite large capital-rural gap in terms of access, quite large age gap, and a slight gender gap as well, with more men using internet than women. And if we look at some international indices and take 2016 UN e-government survey, Georgia has ranked 61st in e-government and 76th in the e-participation indices out of the 193 UN member states that had been surveyed. So what you see here is a Government of Georgia portal that combines over 70 e-services that it offers to the citizens of Georgia. And we can say that Georgia has been quite lucky, again, over the last 10 years to enjoy quite high political commitment to ICT from the government side. And there are some institutional mechanisms that are in place. We have a data exchange agency that is specifically tasked with advancing e-governance in the country and also with cybersecurity. And government also has adopted an e-Georgia strategy, which has the vision that Georgia will become a more efficient and effective public sector, offering integrated and high-quality services. But to date, the government's efforts have mostly focused on providing these e-services, mostly related to passport and IDs and some of the life events like marriage and childbirth. And less so, but still there are efforts to also move on to e-participation. And several government agencies, more so on the central level than the local level, but they have introduced e-platforms for citizen engagement. But although governments, notwithstanding the fact that Georgia's online service availability has dramatically increased, we still have a gap in terms of availability of these services, but also the use of these services. So let's just talk about some of the enabling factors. And when it comes to Georgia, open government partnership has been one of the biggest factors in Georgia's journey in e-governance. Georgia joined this initiative in 2011, and last year we became a chair of the initiative. And I'm quite proud to say that we're actually preparing for a global OGP summit that is going to happen in Tbilisi, Georgia this July. And at the same time, the government is working on its fourth OGP action plan. Julia mentioned co-creation, and co-creation when it comes to OGP means that governments are working together with civil society to design and implement some of the commitments that the governments take. And this has been one of the most successful cases for Georgia's journey, really, both on the parliamentary side and also on the executive government side. Co-creation has been something that has yielded the most impressive results in terms of what Georgia has achieved. And we can say that OGP really has served as a platform to cement political will, especially when we talk about the e-governance. And the two tools that I'm going to present here are actually a demonstration of the two commitments that came out of the OGP. So this is the budget monitor tool, and I believe we have a video queuing up. If we can turn it on, please, because I cannot do it from here. Yes, thank you.
თითოეულ მოქალაქეს უფლება აქვს იცოდეს, როგორ ხდება მისი გადასახადებიდან შევსებული ბიუჯეტის განკარგვა. საჯარო რესურსების მართვა კომპლექსური პროცესია, მისი ანალიზი კი სპეციფიკურ ცოდნას მოითხოვს. სწორედ ამიტომ, სახელმწიფო აუდიტის სამსახურმა საჯარო რესურსების მონიტორინგი კიდევ უფრო მარტივი და გამჭვირვალე გახადა ნებისმიერი დაინტერესებული პირისთვის. ვებ პლატფორმა Budget Monitor G-ზე მომხმარებელზე მორგებული ადვილად აღქმადი გრაფიკებით ხელმისაწვდომია ისეთი მნიშვნელოვანი ინფორმაცია, როგორიცაა 100-მდე აუდიტის ანგარიში ყოველწლიურად, 62 მხარჯავი დაწესებულების ხარჯი, 76 მუნიციპალიტეტის ბიუჯეტი, 400-მდე სახელმწიფო პროგრამა და ქვეპროგრამა. ვებ პლატფორმა პარლამენტის წევრებს, სამოქალაქო საზოგადოების წარმომადგენლებს, დაინტერესებულ ექსპერტებსა და მოქალაქეებს უნიკალურ შესაძლებლობას აძლევს აირჩიონ მათთვის საინტერესო სფერო და მყისიერად მიიღონ მუდმივად განახლებადი და სანდო ინფორმაცია სახელმწიფო შემოსავლების, ხარჯების, ვალის, ინფრასტრუქტურული პროექტების, პროგრამული ბიუჯეტის შესყიდვების და აღნიშნულ საკითხებზე აუდიტის შედეგად გამოვლენილი ხარვეზებისა და რეკომენდაციების შესახებ. Budget Monitor G. თქვენი სივრცე ბიუჯეტის კონტროლისთვის. სახელმწიფო აუდიტის სამსახური. უკეთესი მმართველობისთვის.
So I do hope that, I hope that you could read the subtitles because I only know one person that can understand Georgian in this audience. The Budget Monitor tool is something that the State Audit Office of Georgia has developed with our support and also World Bank support. And this tool has been operational for 1 year, and it basically is a one-stop shop for all information about public finances. And it also is a tool for citizen participation in the oversight of public expenditures. And the primary users of the tools are members and staff of parliament, media, citizens, civil society organizations, and academia. And so here are a couple of screenshots that, of the things that the video did not show. So here you can see how the tool makes it possible to compare how much two spending institutions are spending in the government, in the employee compensation. So here we see the Constitutional Court of Georgia and the Central Election Commission, and how much they're spending in salaries of their employees. And then we see how many employees they actually have on board. And the State Audit Office also has used this opportunity that the tool gives us to raise awareness about the Sustainable Development Goals and also what role does the State Audit Office play in meeting the commitments of the SDGs. And we can see that there have been 34 audits initiated by the State Audit Office that have been related to the SDGs. And this page also showcases some of the findings and recommendations that the agency has issued. And last but not least, to talk about citizen participation is this citizens page, so-called, which gives the opportunity to Georgian citizens to report cases of corruption that they have witnessed. And the State Audit Office has taken the obligation to follow up on these cases. So the next tool is the government petition platform, which is the first government e-petition platform. It's called ichange.gov.ge. And here, with this platform, citizens of Georgia can actually fill the petitions, and the government is obligated to respond in a certain number of time. So a concept for the platform was also developed based on the co-creation principle of the OGP and with active participation from the civil society. And to date, around 150 petitions have been received, and the platform has had around 15,000 unique users, and it has been operational for 6 months. Now, this platform has a challenge that is related to how many signatures does a petition require to actually be considered by the government, and the number of signatures is 10,000. Which, to put it in context, the UK similar e-petition system also requires 10,000 signatures, with Georgia's population being 3.7 million, as I said. So it is a real challenge. To date, out of the 150 received petitions, none of them have achieved the 10,000 mark, which continues to be a challenge, and the civil society organizations that we're partners with and our project as well continues to work with the government to make the number of required signatures less, so that the platform actually achieves what it is designed for. And then I would like to wrap up with some of the challenges to e-participation in Georgia, but I don't think that these are unique to my country. Obviously, access, skills, and awareness speak for themselves. When we talk about trust and confidence and successful examples, it's important to note that Georgia has a very hard history, and coming from a Soviet legacy, trust in institutions is not very high. So it is important when we talk about the iChange platform with the budget monitor, to demonstrate successful examples of what e-governance can actually deliver so that the citizens are motivated to participate. And legacy of institutions also is on the same line with the State Audit Office. This is an institution that was known for its punitive actions for decades and decades, during the Soviet times, obviously, but also 15 years since then, before the Rose Revolution, when country was swamped in corruption. And then I already talked about the gap at the central and local levels, which remains a challenge. So with this, I would like to wrap it up.
Okay.
Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Nino. Those are some very, I think, good examples, practical, that we can dig into. Perhaps we can talk about how successful they are. Just think about that. And also maybe we'll talk later about a little bit political will. You mentioned that as well. So, Jeff, I hope you don't mind me referring to you as my justice ringer, but
thank you.
Maybe you could explore those issues, but within the larger context of transparency and accountability.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and it's good to be with Just Track and back with USIP. I started my career down the street here in 1982, and I remember I was so cowed by working for the federal judiciary, and one of the first people I met was Chief Justice Berger, and he was one of my first bosses. And at the time, him being chair of the Judicial Conference of the United States, he was worried about the impact of technology on the services of the judiciary and the challenges that we would meet. And I always remember him saying one thing, and he was concerned about the values of justice. He was concerned about preserving those values in the context of the technical evolution. And in my 31-year career in the federal judiciary, and with having managed the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the transition there, and also worked with the National Center for State Courts and the staff like Jim McMillan here, who used to manage the court technology conferences. He said he was worried about the touch of justice, and that the touch of justice, in his view, was established between the judges and the people. And he didn't want to lose that. And so during my work with the judiciaries, I was always most interested in utilizing technology to enable the effectiveness and the extension of core values. Since that time in 1982, I served as a manager, and we managed and also served on the advisory committees that managed the transition of the United States court system from manual to technical. And there are so many lessons learned, being one of the responsible people in the governance area of the United States courts. There's a few challenges that I'm concerned about in the context of our evolution, technical evolution. And that is, one of our core interests is transparency and enabling transparency. And I think to a large degree, that is one of the benefits of information management systems that are automated, that are supported on websites or accessible by iPhone. I think transparency is evolving as a general concept. There's one thing I'm concerned about, as we develop these systems, I'm concerned that our emphasis is gravitating away from what I call the formal approach to justice, which is largely used to be the way we found the truth. And finding the truth is a core value. For me, seeking the truth, finding the truth, and how we get there is one of the most important principles of an adversarial process, or even an inquisitorial process. Whatever the process might be, how can automation affect the ability to find the truth? That's what the judges do. That's what the juries do. That's what we want it to do. However, the formal justice system is fading. The informal justice system, the alternative justice system, is replacing the formal. Largely, dispute resolution processes are no longer, in many legal systems, tied to the trial system. They're tied to the plea bargain or the mediation or the new online dispute resolution processes. But after a case is filed, the public doesn't see the proceeding if it's in the form of a plea or a settlement. So, yeah, we're transparent, the record's transparent, but where did the process go? I think those are things we have to think about as we talk about the values of the United States system and how it might affect the transitions in other countries. The other thing I worry about is accountability. And IT, obviously, information management systems, gives us a better opportunity to monitor the performance of those that work in the system. It allows us to generate performance management reports that facilitate our ability to track, the management style of a judge or a manager or whatever it might be. But it is enabling us in the long run to manage more effectively. Number 3, I worry about case management disposition times. And I want to use IT to enhance the ability to manage the case more efficiently. One of the greatest tragedies in managing justice systems in the world is the time to disposition. Average case disposition times in most countries that are developing are over 5 years. I know I've been in some, it's 12 years. I know one, it takes 40 years to get through the system. How can IT enable those types of issues? Now, as far as implementation, Jim and I wanted to take our experience from the National Center and the federal judiciary and transfer the knowledge and the practice to other developing environments. And the challenges are, as you know, huge. The capacity issues, the institutional capacity issues, the human resource capacity issues are huge. And how do we effectively implement, modern designs in non-modern societies? That is a challenge. And my thoughts are these. First of all, there are so many opportunities with IT, not just in national development, but we have to think about the trend in regionalizing services. So when I think of development, I think of East Africa or West Africa or the Caribbean as a whole. I think of not only how can we implement a system in one country, because our resources are so limited. I think, and NCSC thinks, how can we manage more collectively a regional response that has the effect of solving some of our cross-border issues? That's an issue. Now, I just want to go through what I consider some of our real development challenges. First of all, other goals. for me was always provide enhanced public access to the record and the proceedings, improve public trust, reduce budget pressure, and we talk about results. One of the results and one of the incentives that I had as a manager was, as we were implementing IT, information management, I had the budget. I controlled the budget and I controlled the implementation. I knew how much money I was saving when I introduced e-filing, e-service, record storage, internet services, fee applications, 40%. 40%. So when we had a budget reduction of 10% in 2004, it saved 40%. Now, I'm not going to go through the whys, but you have to be able to enhance productivity. In fact, it really also comes down to what is the management capacity of the operating environment. You have to have inherent management capacity. In fact, the skill set has become so much more technical. And you have so many managers with only a clerical background. And you have to have the technical skill sets to make the transitions at the management and technical level. And you have to develop those services. Now, the other question is, should we outsource or should we build internally? I was always adverse because I believed always in protecting the institution and developing the institution and not developing dependencies outside the institution. Because as judges and managers, we had to worry about conflicts. I've always proactively felt that the key for us was we owned what we built. And when we talk about collaborating with countries at the project level, and we were talking about sustainability, my thought is you start building sustainability from day one. That's what I think. And it's in several strategic areas. In the strategic plan development at the management level, the judicial level, the civil society level is all part of the process. But I wanted to say, so also, we have to understand the governance organization of every environment we're working in. What are the control points? Who controls the decision-making process? And 3, who's the leader? Who's going to get the job done? Who's going to be there when we're finished to oversee the continuing implementation of the project? One of the keys of being NCSC is being an institution. We now have projects directly with Nigeria and Trinidad as an institution. So we don't have a deadline. We don't have a project plan. We're there from the beginning till it's in, and we're sure it's going to be sustainably maintained, and we will be a continuing partner with whoever we work with. But how many countries do we work in where the court presidents or the attorney generals or the ministers of justice are only there 1 or 2 years? In Brazil, president judges, 1 year. Colombia, 2 years. They have their own agendas. But if you have capacity that's institutional at the governance level, like we have in Nigeria with the National Judicial Council chair being there for 10 years, you can get something done. Also, another failure point in implementation, every system has to run parallel. In other words, we have to have a goal of authenticating the electronic record as the original. Once that goal is achieved, you can transition from the manual to the electronic. That's the failure point. Countries aren't able to transition from the manual to the electronic because they aren't confident in authenticating the record as the original. Also, funding. Funding, yeah, Donor funding is one thing. Non-donor funding is the challenge. The budget process in most developing countries is not based on OECD principles. I did not realize this until I did the budget study in Trinidad, and I realized that cash-based appropriations methods were very difficult. It was very difficult to strategically plan when you can't execute until you get the cash. Big issue. And I don't think people even understand that only 38 countries in the world have accrual-based approaches to budgeting and finance. And really, so when you think about that, if you're cash-based, you don't have outside funding, you can't, it's hard to execute. To what advantage can we take advantage of cloud technologies in implementing? I think is really important. In the Caribbean, for example, we are operating out of a cloud. I forget where it's at, Miami, somewhere, Jim. Yeah, but the server configuration is not a concern of the country that's operating the new software. So you're able to build regional distribution around the cloud. The other thing about technology is the reason we saved 40% was we were able to redistribute the work from the court to the bar. In other words, if you look at the process, we were doing it twice. We're only doing it once now. So there's advantages in process implementation. And then we get into the big issues, and I'll begin, it's 4 o'clock, I'll begin to finish here, but the cultural issues are huge. And we all know that. And we know we can't plan something as complex as a case management, information management process with a fixed period of time. If there's one thing we've learned in managing complex projects, you set goals. If you set deadlines and you miss the deadlines, then you're going to lose trust. I look at it, and I told the Chief Justice of Nigeria, we met, the first thing I said, she was talking about how she was going to improve transparency and public access with the new system, and she wanted to set a deadline. And I said, patience, patience, patience. Give it time. It's not a strategic 5-year plan. It's a strategic generational plan. And that also includes many of the elements that we're talking about here, and many of the presentations are and things that can be incorporated with these basic digital components of managing this process that I'm talking about. But any one of the things that I've been discussing can create results that could lead to failure. And I do know, I've been to 90 countries, I've been in the courts, I've seen successes, I've seen the failures. Most of the failures that are sustainable failures, that are failures, are because they don't have technical capacity and they try to run parallel and they fail and the computers are sitting there and they're going back to paper. So I just wanted to bring up, transparency is reinforced, accountability can be reinforced. I just got back from 2 work groups from the UN on both of those topics. IT can be a resolution, an enabler to improving transparency and accountability. But I think what's most important for the courts, because the first sentence of our Constitution is to establish justice. To me, technology is all about that. How do we establish justice? How do we connect justice to the people? How do we make it work for the country? That's the key. And it can work. It can make it work better. It can make it work not so good. So that's all I have and thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Provocative and insightful. What I heard Julia saying, we all hear different things, but in many ways, technology is propelling us and also pulling us forward. It's a reality. We have to learn to adapt to it and to use it. Nino, you're showing how it can be used in a very practical way for governance. Jeff, I heard you say, well, we still have some fundamental questions that we should keep in mind as this process unfolds and as these platforms and systems and services are unfolding around us or being developed around us. So we have about 25 minutes. I definitely want to get the audience engaged, but first we just want to maybe have a little bit of a conversation up here, coming back to some of the issues. I'd like to just tease out first this issue of political will. And I'm doing that because at the first Just Track Innovations, Rule of Law Innovation Symposia, we focused on political will, how to build and sustain political will. And I think it might be relevant to this conversation of, how do we build political will for often comprehensive e-governance or e-justice systems. And so Nino, I heard you talk about this political will. I think in many ways Georgia is a good example. So there's obviously OGP, that's a externality or
Yes.
something that helps create a political will, but any other insight you can provide into how do we create political will? And don't say, well, the US government or donors have to do that, but not just for the donors. What can other actors do?
Yeah, OGP is an obvious example, but also when we talk about externalities, it's where Georgia wants to go, and the inspiration is the path that we have chosen to join the EU. So that's one obvious example of how political will can be built. And another thing is, I really look at this simply. When the government of Georgia, and any government for that matter, for democratic government, tries the e-governance path, I really would like to believe that there's no going back from that. And here we talk about the simple demand and supply. So it will be very difficult to explain to Georgian citizens how they can enjoy all these e-services that are online, and how they can enjoy the services that the private sector provides, and then have to gather 30,000 signatures on paper and submit e-petitions to Parliament. So I would really like to believe that there is no going back, and the way is only forward here.
Okay. Any other comments on political will?
No, I think vision is very important in establishing will, being able to show that there's a better future, and I think that's part of it. But I could go into more on that. I won't.
Well, I think when you look, you mentioned the UN eGov survey, and I've spent a lot of years working on that survey. And when you look at the top 10 in public service delivery, because the survey also has infrastructure and education, which is beyond political will sometimes to resolve, right? But when you look at the countries that rank in the top on public service delivery, almost to a T, there is a strong visionary leadership from above. So in the 2016 survey, the UK ranked #1 in the world on public service delivery. And I happened to be in the UK working with the government when Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson announced that the UK was going to be a knowledge economy, and they established the Office of the e-Envoy, which was the first kind of digital czar. And it became a model for governments around the world, as did the Government Delivery Services Agency, GDS, a kind of innovation technology driver within government. And then if you look at the other top 10 countries, Australia now has a digital transformation agency. Canada has just launched a digital agency. The United States has 18F. Denmark, which is consistently high as a transformation agency. So, the leadership starts from above, and that's very, very important. The externality becomes the way in which, and I've seen it so much through the years, a tool like the UN eGov survey or a mechanism, a really important global mechanism like OGP becomes, the methodology and the community to drive forward, which is OGP, and then the UN tool, because at the end of the day, states like people are competitive, and that healthy dose of competition then creates some of the political will and drives it forward. But you almost never see digital government e-governance succeed from the bottom up. To really be embedded across government institutions, you need the political will.
Okay. We'll stay with you because you mentioned the land of pilots.
My career.
So I guess my question is, how do we move from pilot phase into the follow-on phase? And so in some contexts, we talk about scalability or scaling up, where we see a development impact or a result at a more targeted level. Do you have any
I wish I had
examples?
the answer is, I wish I had that answer. If I look at my land to pilots experience, and this is prior to IBM working with the European Commission and smart cities, and what I saw was it was really fascinating and very frustrating. The technological innovations would come out of Silicon Valley, so that by the time the 16 signatures were stamped in the right color ink and bounced back, the statement of work was already outdated, and the bureaucracy made us implement it anyway. So, €3 million to implement something that was already outdated, because something in Silicon Valley had already come out that had antiquated the idea we had 2 years before the bureaucracy funded the project. So the technology was coming out of Silicon Valley. The government funding to actually implement it was not coming from the US, it was coming from the European Union. And Europe was filled with government agencies and cities especially that were willing to pilot this. But the actual policy vision to implement it was in the Middle East, was in the Gulf states. Everybody's heard of Smart Dubai. So, the technology would come out of the US, it would be piloted in Europe, and it would be embraced at the policy and governmental level in the Gulf and in EMEA. But where I've actually more recently, I've spent a couple of last few years in Australia, I'm actually seeing the Australian government being the government that is kind of, I don't mean the little train in a bad way, but just kind of chugging and just doing. And when I got down there in the past 2 years, they are really implementing some of the most forward-looking and visionary government agency-wide transformation and re-envisioning of service delivery. So I don't have an answer for how you get out of the land of pilots, but I do have a kind of very interesting global roadmap of Silicon Valley hops to Europe, Europe hops to the Gulf, and Australia kind of just gets on and does it.
Yeah, Andrew, I always use pilots, both in rule of law programming and in the courts that I managed. And for me, they were always ways to leverage success and prevent failure, because, and that's how you establish buy-in. And I think if the product sells itself. In other words, if the judges or the attorneys see that this is going to save time, and time management being one of the big issues everywhere, if it saves time and you can leverage it at the pilot phase and exhibit the productivity, then the expansion goals are more easily accomplished. That's my experience.
Why don't we open it up to the audience, see if you have any questions for our panelists. Okay. Steve?
This is kind of related to the pilot question, but it got me thinking in development world, proposal writing and quarterly report writing and end report writing and monitoring and evaluation reporting, there's almost never a failure Failure never happens on paper, at least. Every project I've ever been involved in has been a smashing success, and all the targets were reached. And I can't imagine anybody else has a radically different experience. But the problem is that it's in a competitive environment. You want to continue to get grants, and you want to continue to be successful so that you can keep getting grants. And one of the results of that is that our business is a little bit risk averse because you don't want to take too many risks. Donors don't want to take a lot of risks, so they write grants and that basically have built in some sort of fail-safe mechanism. You're not going to do anything too risky. And implementers follow that and don't do things that are too risky. But when I hear about some of the discussions that we're having about technology, and it seems that one of the ways that Silicon Valley has been successful in being such an engine is this whole culture of failure, right? I've heard from so many people that you're nothing if you haven't failed a handful of times in the Bay Area. And so I'm curious how the panel sees that sort of mismatch. Have we somehow been able to develop the ability to fail, or how can we bring the two together? Because I think we probably need a little bit more failure.
Let me just say that because,
That's Andrew, that's you more
yeah,
than me, yeah.
but I hope I'll give you space and freedom to jump in on that one. But, so yeah, culture of failure, I will reveal that it is something that we, within USAID, are speaking about more and more. And not to make light of it, but instead of doing a conference of successes, we were thinking of doing a failures conference.
We've been arguing for that for years,
Right.
the lessons learned from failing.
But there's still some residual
And no one will show up.
concern. But we're still giving all of our partners and implementers templates that say success story, and you diligently fill them out, and then we spread them around. But I would just also add to it that we do have a commitment to a so-called learning agenda. And we do want to look critically at what we're doing as donors in partnership with implementers. And so to the extent you're writing up the reports, and it's all case by case, core by core, I always like to see, if something hasn't worked, report it, explain why, what did we learn from that process?
This is an area where I think there is a lot of successful movement. 15 years ago, when I started working in this field, it was think big, start small, scale fast. And the motto now you'll hear more and more is think big, start small, fail fast. And there's more and more emphasis, shift, let's say in government tech. It used to be waterfall projects. Remember all those big 10-year projects that, the requirements were this long for the RFP, and then the vendor answered it, and then it inevitably failed. That was called waterfall. And what's being embraced now is agile development. And what that is, and this is when I'm talking about we need to reinvent the way we approach things. When we think about the NGO world and the funding world and the EU world that I come from, we don't just have to transform it so that we can have the failure conference, which I desperately, sign me up, because I've been advocating that for years. But we need to reinvent the paradigm of funding so that you're rethinking what your delivery model is and what your KPI model is. Because an agile model would not have you predetermine what the project is going to do and have the recipient of the aid tell you every single thing they're going to do along the way and have it locked down before the ink is dry on those 16 signatures. In an agile model, success is the impact you want to have, and how you get there is left to be done in small sprints that iteratively learn from each other. That has permeated or filtered in. That is how Silicon Valley develops now. That is how more and more the private sector develops. Government is increasingly embracing the agile development model through agencies like 18F and GDS and the Digital Transformation Agency in Australia. And I would argue that if government can embrace this model and find a way for it to work, then USAID, then the European Commission, then the UN have an obligation to be thinking about that. And that is about reinventing the way in which we define the paradigms for funding and the paradigms for trialing and the definitions of success.
Good. You have the keynote at the failures. So anyone else? Good? Okay.
No, I just want to say one thing, and I am really concerned. I've never seen a more important time for donor investment in rule of law. And I'm concerned, particularly in the area of technology. I think we're stepping back. I do worry because the gap may be widening between the developed and the non-developed. And the challenge is to help the developed obtain some of the same opportunities as the developed. And I really hope that we can focus on that and continue to help Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, many of the countries in Central Asia. Some countries are going forward so fast, and the economies of scale are developing so quickly in these countries. And then there's everybody else, and I'm worried about the everybody else. And I'm like, Pakistan, they're trying so hard in Pakistan, but I just hope we can continue to help. That's all. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Please.
My name is Paul Denage. I support some projects with the Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs in Western Hemisphere. First off, thank you to everyone for your discussion and your points from the panel. I was just wondering, in Latin America, we see a lot of institutional changes as a result of elections, and what we've seen, especially in the Northern Triangle, is that when key partners leave, we often lose momentum. And as the panel was discussing, there's a need for that kind of institutional buy-in from the top in order to ensure the longevity and success of these programs. So my question is, as we deal with these changes in the institution, how can we ensure buy-in and continuity of projects so that we can maintain the momentum and contain the donor buy-in?
Yeah. I can answer that. I can try. I work in all those countries you're talking about. I have a memorandum of understanding with all the Supreme Courts in Latin America. I found that forming a bond is critical with the country. Generally, the governance structure in the law enforcement, judiciary area, ministries does change. However, some of the bureaucracies have leadership that we have to identify, that while there's governance transition, you have to find the institutional factors that I think are consistent. And that generally is at the staff level. And if anything we need to do, that management capacity area, almost every structure has a secretariat. That secretariat, to me, is one of the key relationship points. We want to go to the Chief Justice, we want to go to the Minister of Justice, and they're gone tomorrow. I want to establish a working relationship in Honduras with someone that I know is going to be there for 20 years. In fact, one of the first questions I ask whoever I'm working with, how long are you going to be here? And what are your goals? And then we also need to build management capacity at those levels. If we focus too much up here, we're missing the management level. Find that management level and build the capacity and the knowledge and the training that we're talking about here. If we can build it there, I think the institutions have a better opportunity to excel. And everyone wants to excel, And our leadership, though, is still very important in those countries. We have a great opportunity in Latin America, so I hope, I like working with those countries a lot. Yeah. That's only my thought, Andrew.
Nina, I was wondering, because earlier you mentioned civil society and its role as sort of on the demand side of now that the government has shown the leadership in delivering or making available different types of e-governance or e-services, people come to expect it. And then you also mentioned the petitions. But is there a particular role for civil society in the sustainability of these reforms? related to e-governance. We talk often in terms of social accountability and the role of civil society organizations in that accountability loop, but it shouldn't always be an adversarial relationship, should it? Are there any examples of cooperation?
Well, actually, both of the tools that I presented have benefited from a lot of input from civil society, especially at the design phase of these products. And their input has really been instrumental because they do bring the perspective of what the citizens really want. Because they have day-to-day contacts through their branches with different parts of Georgian society. So although some of them are also in the watchdog role, as you mentioned, so there's some adversity, but there's a lot of cooperation because they, being a part of this co-creation process, also take the responsibility for the final product. Mm-hmm. And that dynamic has really worked well in Georgia.
I think it's a good model. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'm comfortable closing a little early. So I just, please join me in thanking my panelists. And thank you for your attention and your engagement.